Hey there, kiddos. In this particular lesson, 5.3, we're going to be looking to see how can we identify whether or not two ratios or two unit rates are proportional, whether or not there's a proportional relationship. So our objective for today is determine whether two quantities are in a proportional relationship. So we're going to be able to do that if we can determine whether the ratios are forming a proportion. We can explain how to determine whether quantities are proportional. And then lastly, can you distinguish between proportional and non-proportional relationships? As a reminder, proportions are an equation stating that the values of two ratios are equivalent. So 2 to 3 is equivalent to 4 to 6. That forms a proportion. And if you have your textbook, you can go to page 196, 197, and 198. And as you can see on page 196, we'll be able to use cross products, which is something that's going to come up a little bit later in the video. So determine whether or not ratios form a proportion. We want to be able to tell whether these two ratios form a proportion. When you are determining whether ratios form a proportion, you are checking whether the ratios are equivalent. So let's compare these two. 6/4. If we simplify this, it's equal to 3/2. And 8/12. If we simplify that, it's equal to 2/3. Are those two ratios equivalent? The answer is no. These values are not equivalent. Therefore, these two ratios are not equivalent. Because of that, they don't form a proportion. What about 10 to 40 and 2.5 to 10? Once again, if we simplify 10 to 40, it's equal to 1/4 or 1/4. And when we simplify 2.5 and 10, well, that's a little bit tough. There isn't a straight number that we can see there. So perhaps instead of dividing, we can multiply, and then we can see if we can simplify. So let's multiply times 10. 2.5 times 10 is going to give us 25. 10 times 10 gives us 100. Well, 25 over 100, can we simplify that? Yeah, that's a little easier to simplify. Divide by 25, we end up with 1/4. So 10 to 40 and 2.5 to 10, because those two values are equivalent, those ratios are equivalent, that means those two ratios form a proportion. Hoping that makes sense. If you simplify or multiply and you get the same value, then it forms a proportion. If it doesn't, then it's not proportional. Another way that we can use or determine whether or not two proportions or two ratios are proportional is using cross products, where we're multiplying, as we take a look in this example of A, B, those are two values, and C, D. If we multiply A and D or B and C, if those values are equal to each other, then it's proportional. If they are not equal to each other, then it's not proportional. Here's an example. 6 to 9 and 12 to 18. Let's use a cross products. If we multiply 6 times 18 and we multiply 9 times 12, that's equal to 108. 9 times 12 is equal to 108. Because those two are equal, the cross products are equal, we can say that these two ratios are proportional. What about 2/3 to 4/5? If we multiply 2 times 5 and then we multiply 3 times 4, do those two products equal the same?